the first item is obviously membership and membership update. And as you can see, our chair, Colin, is not available today. He's got off with a bad chest infection. So thing is, as you see in the minutes of the meeting, we were looking for a vice chair and a chair for formula funding. Now that has been found, and I'm being the one who's been asked to be vice chair of the school forum. So I need ratification from you good people if you wish me to chair this meeting and be your vice chair for school forum. So just put your hands up or shake your heads, yeah? Right, all happy, right? I don't know how I got it, but obviously there. So we'll deal then with item 2 of the agenda, apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Colin and from Deborah Wiley in Cramlington. Andrea, Todd, is there any other apologies you received by email?
I have apologies from Keith Faulkner.
Yeah. Anybody else received any apologies, from their schools or anything like that? No? Okay, now. Right.
Well, we haven't had specific apologies from Ben Ryder at Berwick Middle. Obviously, yeah. He's off at the moment. He was involved in a car accident, unfortunately. So I think we can probably minute his apologies on that basis.
Okay, now right. Thank you, Mark. Bruce. Item 3 of the agenda: the closure of interest. If anybody got any interest in any of the items on the agenda, if you have, please declare them now. If not, then we'll push on. So, yeah. Everybody's saying right. Minutes of the meeting, right, of Wednesday the 29th of September. I will deal with minutes and matter arising all as we slowly go through them, right? So obviously is on page 128 of your agenda papers. So page 1, which obviously is the one that shows you very clearly who was attended. So
Graham, I attended, but my name's not on.
Right. Okay. Can you please?
My diary, I wasn't out anything, so my name's not on. Andrea Mead.
Okay, now right. Oh, thank you. Right, we'll make that and do the change. Right, page 2 of the agenda. I'm just obviously using another screen. Obviously, showing all that apology absent. As I said, 15.2 has now been resolved. Right. And
just worth picking that one up, Chair, if I may, as well as your appointment of yourself as Vice Chair. Ben Watson at the previous meeting at the last meeting of the Funding Formula Committee was appointed as Chair of the Funding Formula Committee.
Yeah.
So thanks to Ben for that.
Yeah, right. That's great. Is our director or our councillor available on the meeting? Because I only see so many people across the screen at the moment. Andrea, are you there?
I am here.
I am, yes.
Yeah, right. Just obviously, I know it's an old thing that keeps coming up. 15.3 on the minutes. Obviously, did you have a conversation with the EFE and the other organisation? What were their thoughts of the forum thoughts about this money not coming back into the authority? The Aden Bridge Brand Bright Trade.
Morning, Graham.
Good morning.
I think guys on the call as well, so you may want to come in, but there is still no further action. It's not for us to take this forward. It's a DFE and Bright Tribe discussion. So we've got no update on that, and I don't expect to get any update.
No. Well, it's more a matter of principle. I know I keep bringing it up each time, but it was a good sum of money that was given to Bright Tribe, and it should have been spent on the children in Aden Bridge. And I thought, if any of us did that, we would not be sitting here now today. We're more likely to be at Her Majesty's pleasure. But yes, I think it's a bit much when that amount of money was given, and then obviously what happened at Aden Bridge, and now the county had to step in and actually redo the school and everything like that. I think, but we'll keep trying, we'll keep asking. Eventually we may get something back,
Chair, we will make sure that we continue to ask the questions when we have updates. We'll not do it at every meeting, but we will make sure that on an intermittent basis we ask the question.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Andrea. Yeah, okay. Right, we'll move on then. Anything on further on page 2? No? Okay.
Chair, if I may, Sue's got a hand up.
Sorry.
It was just a point. Could we just ask people to mute if they're actually not speaking, because we're getting a lot of feedback.
Okay.
on the recording, and a number of people are not on mute, so if they could, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Page 3 of the minutes. Accurate record or any matters arising on it? No. Page 4 of the minutes. Accurate record and any matters arising? Page 5 of the minutes. Accurate record or any matters arising? Page 6 of the minutes. Accurate record or any matters arising from this? A lot of this will be obviously dealt in the agenda as well further on. Right, page 7, right, accurate record and any matters arising. Do you agree then, Forum, that these are a true record of the meeting of the 26th? Andrea, there is an electronic copy of my signature and my initials with the with Linda from the school clerking service. So if you ask her for it, then obviously she can sign it on, there for the records, right? Save me sending another one in. Okay now, right?
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair.
Okay now, right. Right. Item 5, communications. Well, it's the draft minutes of the Formula Funding Committee, and that's page 9 to 12 of your documentation. So, Bruce, are you going to talk through this very quickly, or do you want Ben, the chair? I know Ben was there, but he didn't actually chair it that time because there's some other issues come up in his thing, right? So over to you then, Bruce, please.
Yes, it was the smaller issue of an Ofsted, as I remember. Yeah, most if not all of the papers we had on the at the Formula Funding Committee have subsequently come through to this school's forum, I think, Chair. I think it's worth pointing out, just in terms of what was felt at the Funding Formula Committee, the approach taking around sparsity by schools forum was applauded, and we'll pick that up subsequently. When we were looking at the funding values, and again it's reflected in subsequent recommendations, we considered that further consideration should be given to the use of a mobility factor, and again we expand on that later. And again, subject to available funding, consideration given to a falling rules fund potentially. Again, I think the bottom of page 12 there, and sort of the 9th paragraph, support was reiterated for the 2-phase move we've discussed and agreed previously for progress towards national funding formula. And then according to financial availability, we should look to establish MFG at 2%, again, depending on the thoughts of the forum this morning. Continue to use capping and scaling as necessary to ensure affordability. Again, potentially look at introducing a reduced mobility element and further investigate falling rules, as I've already said. But again, this features in sort of subsequent papers this morning, so I don't see any need to dwell any further on that. The papers are draft, the minutes are draft clearly because they haven't been back to Formula Funding Committee yet. They're still very much hot off the press.
As chair, Ben, as chair of the forum, do you want any comments on this communication, this document, the draft minutes?
Yeah, no, I've got nothing to add to that. Thank you.
Okay, right. Any questions or anything? Are you good people? Wow, this is going to be an easy one to chair. I've got no questions. Right, we'll move on then to obviously the item 6, the school organisation plan attached, page 13 to 76. Who's going to address this one? I think it's actually a superb document, one of the better ones I've seen come out from the authority. Very informative.
That'll be me then, Graham, if you think it's superb.
Yes, I had your name next to it, but I was waiting for you to volunteer, Sue. Yeah. If you could just go through some of the items there, because it's very, very interesting, especially amount of surplus places we're going to have and things like that within, in the next few years.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much. So yeah, this is probably the third time I've spoken about the school organisation plan. It's been through our fact scrutiny committee, also through the council's cabinet, and then we've also spoken at a head teacher conference around it as well. So a number of people already on this call will be fully aware about our school organisation plan. Obviously, we do produce one every year. It isn't a statutory requirement from a local authority any longer, but I think, as Graham has already pointed out, there's some really useful information. It's all the work we do anyway, so I think it's just very helpful to put it all in one place so that all schools, governors, elected members, any interested parties understand the position that we're in terms of our school place planning across Northumberland. So really, just to say, I'll just point out perhaps some of the key changes that we've made to the school organisation plan, because this will be the 5th year that we've actually produced the data within the plan. So you can see that you've obviously got a full report on the school organisation plan, but particularly this time we are looking at the management of surplus places. We're setting out a more robust approach to dealing with those surplus places, looking to rebalance the places that we have to support our small rural schools, and continue to provide education as close to pupils' home communities as possible. That's very much a strategy in the reduction of our surplus places. And again, we feel that this approach also supports the council's climate change and the action plan that we've got as a local authority that looks at the years 21 to 23. Just some of the, I suppose, anecdotal sort of data that's in there, that you will notice that Hayden Bridge, and we talk about it regularly here at Schools Forum, the partnership, has the highest number of surplus places, and we've currently got 43% surplus places across the partnership. And again, no surprise to anybody that Berwick is our second highest, with 32% surplus places. So you can see the challenges that we've got as a local authority in the far extremes of our county to the far north and the far west, where communities are getting smaller and the demand for school places is becoming less. However, we've then got Morpeth, which has the fewest number of surplus places, again with just 7%. So that is still quite tight when you think about the number of schools that we've got. And again, it's a catchment area that's based very much around a town, but you've also then got the rurality around Rothbury and beyond that we serve as well. So again, rarely in a school organisation plan do we have the places where we need them. So you'll also see the balance within the plan where we have got surplus places, but you'll also see where we're actually growing our capacity. And quite a lot of that is actually linked to housing development. So again, we've updated the section 4.5 on house building numbers so that you can see in a lot more detail around the numbers that we're expecting to be built on a partnership by partnership basis. So again, in light of looking at surplus places, you can see from the information under that section that we've only got 100 houses being built in Hayden Bridge, but actually we've got nearly 1,400 houses being built in Morpeth. So where we've got the fewest places, that's where we've actually got the most houses being built. So you can understand there is that balance and plan that needs to come together, and that's why we do it in this way. I'd also done a report more recently into fact scrutiny around an update of our infrastructure contributions. So this is where the developer comes along, builds houses, and we expect them to contribute to education infrastructure. So again, we are just we've just reviewed that to make sure that we get the maximum contribution we can to grow the capacity where it's actually needed. So again, all of that is set out in the school organisation plan. I think the other point to note is around special educational needs, that we are enhancing our school organisation plan to include that element, and probably just for the second time this year we've done some more detailed forecasting around ISD and SEMH, because those are the two quickest growing demands that we've got for specialist places. So you can see within the school organisation plan that we, on page 26 to 33, that sets out the rationale and how we intend to predict our numbers. the way that numbers have grown over the last 10 years, and we've more or less seen the vast majority of our special schools double in capacity to meet that demand during that time. So again, lots of useful information all coming together, and we will produce it again next year. I'm not sure if Schools Forum would like another report on that.
Sue, can I thank you very much for the report, because I found it a very easy read, and I was one thing I did notice very good, which is obviously because I do school appeals right across the 9 local authorities in the northeast, how many the high percentage of children in primary and secondary get their first preference or first choice, which is very good. So you mustn't have many of school appeals come up then during the course of the year.
We do. Yeah, we definitely do, because where you can see the pinch points, as we talk about Morpeth, Ponteland, again, you know, what the data says, yes, we are the top performing local authority in the country in order of giving first preferences to our parents, but that doesn't account for all the people in Newcastle that want to get places in Ponteland. So the vast majority of our appeals are for people trying to be educated in Northumberland, shall we say, which is absolutely fantastic for us that we're so popular even outside of our own county.
So if you know, a building company, say, coming into an area, right, and they're putting up quite a few houses, but then they see in that area from this report so many surplus places, what pressure would you put on them to help to contribute to all the education?
So yes, the policy, the schools do need to be 95% full before we would actually go and seek a contribution from the developer. So other than that, the only way is, I suppose, through goodwill with developers. But they do also do that, you know, individual schools, obviously, you know, getting computers, paying for trips, etc. So they are very much under their corporate social responsibility umbrella. They will still put enhancements into education, but it's not in a formal way that actually grows capacity. But that doesn't stop us or the schools themselves approaching the developer for contributions towards things, shall we say.
Okay,
it's not legally obliged to do so.
Would the director like to make any comments about the report?
Thank you, Chair. It's an excellent report. We've had long discussions, facts around this, and actually I'm really pleased. So Alan's comment into the chat bar, which is about the usefulness of the information in the report. So I would encourage all head teachers to ensure that they've looked at the data. I know that there are challenges ahead with falling school roles across the school numbers and pupil-aged children across the county moving forward, and that is a significant factor for all head teachers to consider in terms of budget planning. It's clearly really important and key information in terms of build or capital development, but actually all of that information is really rich and it helps us to inform the model. So for example, the work that Sue talked around SEN, that's really crucial and key. It allows us to help plan for the future, and it helps, I hope, head teachers to understand the context around where we should suggest change and development to meet more children's needs moving forward. So really good report, really excellent set of information that's very useful for lots of aspects.
Thank you. So I say, Sue, on behalf of the forum, can I thank you so much for you know, an excellent report, easy read, and for all the information and everything like that. And I should be recommending it to my governing body for them to read as well, because you know, they need to understand what's going in within each of the areas we're actually in. Okay. Any questions from anybody else to Sue before I let her get off the hook? No. Well, you're giving me an easy time this morning, right? So there's no further questions then, I think, right? So we'll move on then to item 7, school block, National Forum of Funding, Sparsity Consultation. That, I believe, is you, Bruce?
It is, Chair, thank you, and apologies to Forum. This paper hasn't gone out with the pack. Apologise for that. I'll share a copy on screen. It's a very short paper, and most, if not all, of the ground covered should be familiar to the Forum. It's what you'll see in terms of today's papers, there's a common thread going through it. What we're trying to do is remind and refresh schools forums knowledge as we move through, and then formally consult under the final paper under the school funding for 2022-23. So I'll pick that up and share the screen now.
Okay, cheers, Bruce.
Okay. Again, a little history lesson initially. Back in November 2019, Schools Forum supported what they call a disapplication request to the ESFA in relation to a change in methodology used to the measurement of sparsity, to do it by road distance for 6 schools, so they qualified, rather than the as the crow fly method used at that stage by the ESFA. From the DSG, we allocated £141,000 in relation to that for 2021 and repeated that in 21-22. Pleasingly, we saw this on the agenda of the ESFA sparsity consultation in March this year. We shared a draft response with the forum earlier, and now the government essentially has responded to the consultation findings. A copy is in the report, and I'll send this report round after immediately following Schools Forum. Again, key findings highlighted is the strong support for the policy aim and proposals in response to this consultation has reinforced the case to increase funding for small remote schools. That's important for Northumberland because we have a higher proportion of small remote schools, certainly than the national average, and we would be an outlier in respect of that. Highlighting 3 key changes. Thankfully, the standard method to measure road distances, pupil journey distances, is going to use road journeys rather than the as the crow flies methodology. Why does that matter? It matters because essentially that sends the average pupil distance and increases the average pupil distance, so more schools then fall within the respective threshold of 2 or 3 miles being the average pupil journey to the next appropriate school should one school not be there or be closed. So that's important. Existing schools that qualify will also benefit because the maximum amounts of sparsity funding have been increased at both primary and secondary level. And the final element, which wasn't as evident in the consultation document, was there's a taper being introduced, which means that schools that are marginally below the average distance threshold of 2 or 3 miles will attract some funding to reduce the chances of a cliff edge to sparsity funding. Remember, average distance is one key element. The other key crucial element is average year group sizes, and they have been unchanged in this as a result of the consultation. Important to highlight in terms of overall funding, the funding going into sparsity in 22-23 is more than doubling. 95 million in total, of which Northumberland is forecast to receive 2.6 million, again based on October 2020 data, which will be refreshed. Going back 2 years, obviously we received 1.1 million, so that's important. We'll look at the final appendix, which shows where the additional investment is, additional funding is going to go, again based on Appendix A. And again, just briefly in terms of summary and conclusions, and again, it's about highlighting the important role of Schools Forum and supporting the original disapplication request. It may have cost £141,000 back in 2019 for 2021, but I hope what we can demonstrate is that because we have backed our proposals with a smaller amount of cash back there, it has highlighted this on the agenda and has subsequently involved additional school funding coming into Northumberland. Okay. Again, I'll pause briefly on that table there, and I'll circulate this following the meeting. You'll see that essentially, again, as I outlined before, we have beneficiaries who will receive sparsity funding for the first time, and that includes the 6 schools we've previously highlighted and supported through the disapplication request. However, other schools will also benefit in the increased investment in sparsity because of the overall elements going up. Historically, it may have been a £45,000 maximum sum. that's now increasing to £55,000. And again, that demonstrates the potential increase, again, based on last year's data, of £719,000. Okay, I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Any
or any comments?
Or any comments, please? Well, I think they're all very happy, Bruce, with it, with what work you've done, and obviously getting that. So well done again. It's something that's been needed for a very long time. So, you know, there something we have pushed for on forum for a long time. So yes, so well done.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, if there's no questions on that, we'll move then on to the next item, which is SEND update, which is page 77 to 82 of your agenda papers. Over to you, Sam and Nicola. I believe you are going to do a share report on this.
Yes, I'm going to start off. It's Sam here. So Bruce, can I share my screen?
I think it's already up on my screen. It's on my screen at the moment, Sam.
We've got a PowerPoint.
Sorry, that's I've stopped sharing now, Sam. Sorry, that was my fault. You should have access now.
Yeah.
Oh, Nicola, are you able to help here?
He's struggling. One moment.
Oh no, there it is. I'm there.
Okay, right. Over to you then, Sam, please. Yeah.
Right. Just going to view as a slideshow. There we are. Right. I'm going to talk very briefly about the SEND revisit. It was a long time ago, but I am conscious that we haven't talked about it here at Schools Forum. So I'm not going to cover an awful lot of detail, but I am going to just briefly talk about it and the context and around our next steps, just to keep everyone informed. So it was back in May that we received our notification, and we had our 3-day inspection from Ofsted and CQC. They looked at a wide number of things, and they highlighted a number of strengths for us. So one of which was around our collegiate approach to the delivery of SEND developments across the local area partnership. They looked at our SEND strategy and felt it was very positive in terms of the future direction. They could see that we've improved the quality of our education healthcare plans. They particularly commented on the fact that we have one of the shortest waiting times for children and young people to receive support for mental health from SIPs in the country. They looked at they felt that we had a good understanding of the importance of early identification and the graduated approach. That our parent carer forum was strong, provided effective challenge to the SEND partnership, and that our academic outcomes were improving and exclusions for learners with SEND were reducing. So the outcome is that Ofsted and CQC deemed that we had made sufficient progress in addressing the 3 areas of weakness, and that the formal quarterly support and challenge visits from the Department for Education and NHS England will cease. They did note a significant improvement with a seismic change in leadership and culture since we were last inspected. But I suppose the important thing to talk about is the context of the judgment. The inspectors came back to review the progress that we'd made on our written statement of action. And that was, if you like, the promise that we made to our parents and carers, our young people, our schools and settings and our partners. And they came back to see whether we'd kept our promise. And did we do all the things that we said that we were going to do? So while it's a really positive report, it's important to note that it's not job done. We were very clear with the inspectors that we have more work to do in a number of different areas. And I just wanted to briefly signpost members to our SEND strategy, which has got 4 key priorities. I'm not going to go through these in detail. It's all in the paperwork, but just to talk about the fact that we've got one which is focusing on working together And in this PowerPoint, I've just highlighted a couple of actions underneath that. There are more contained within the strategy. That's around communication and increasing our understanding of lived experience of our families. Second one is around delivering the right support at the right time. So we have work underway to develop pathways around sensory processing difficulties and improving our early identification. The third one is around inclusive education, and that is around workforce development and improving leadership and delivery of support to SEND learners. And the fourth one is preparation for adulthood, with a refreshed careers offer overseen by Preparation for Adulthood lead and reviewing and looking at the range of post-16 options. So it was really just to provide an overview, because I'm conscious that Schools Forum have not had one in terms of the SEND revisit. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Nicola.
Thanks, Sam. So yes, there's quite a couple of pages of data in the report for you to have a look at. But just to highlight some of the key points around the provision of the HINT services being free on delivery for schools, which, as School Forum are very well aware, was the result of some discussions with yourselves over the past few years with regard to transfer of funds from the DSG into the high needs block. So we had our first full year of our new model of delivery last year, which was obviously amidst COVID. And we had a term within that where schools were closed to the majority of pupils. What you'll see looking at the data is that we've managed to achieve a much wider reach into our schools. So we've had 36% more referrals than in the previous year. So advice was sought for an additional 290 children and young people. The percentage change over the 2 years is 19% more schools last year than in the previous year, which brings us to a total of 92% of our schools receiving support from the NICE services in last year, as opposed to 78% the year before. There were increases in numbers of schools referring across all partnerships, with one exception, which was Cramlington. And I'm pleased to see that I've asked for some scrutiny of the referrals from Cramlington this term, and they're back up to where we would expect them to be. The largest changes have been in the Ashington and Ponteland partnerships in terms of numbers of schools referring and pupils referred, and Hayden Bridge has really extended the number of children referred in. Could I have the next slide, please, Sam? So what this means in conclusion is that schools are using our support services more widely with the removal of the financial concerns. So what we're seeing is that referrals are definitely based now on emerging needs. We're able to access support, provide support for learners at much earlier stage in the graduated approach. So we are seeing that the barriers imposed by trading arrangements are definitely starting to ease up. And interestingly, what we're seeing also is an increase in referrals to the teams for whole school training rather than just around individual learners. It also means that our teams are free to operate into a wider range of settings, so early years settings and alternative providers when the needs are identified. Previously, because of the tie-in through the SLA arrangements, this was more challenging for early years settings and APs. And importantly, it means that our specialists can contribute to the multi-agency proactive work. So if we're thinking about the overall priorities within the SEND strategy and also the education and skills priorities moving forward, the teams are able to be directed to support those rather than spending all of their time operating in a traded market. Could I have the next slide, please, Sam? So the trading arrangement, as I say, the details are further in the report, so I'm happy to take more questions around that. We're continuing to operate in this way for this financial year, this academic year, sorry, and at the end of the academic year I'll provide a more fulsome report so that we can reflect on the full 2 years. You'll see in the report that one of the areas that it is very important for us to focus on also is around exclusions. So although we are seeing a downward trajectory of exclusions for SEN support and EHCP learners over the last 4 to 5 years, last year there was an increase slightly on the previous year, so we need to really focus our attention, and being free of trading allows us to do that. Moving on to something else that I'd like to describe to you, we're embarking currently on a Better Futures project within NCC, and this is a time-limited project which is looking at reviewing the EHC pathways in Northumberland. So this is the whole picture really of what schools are doing at SEN support, and then moving on through the statutory processes into the issuing of EHCPs and the provision within schools for EHCPs and annual reviews as such. We've got a very wide reach, which includes stakeholder voice, so we are just beginning. The project is due to run from October until March time, so we've got a launch event with schools tomorrow evening, but we're also seeking the views of parents and carers, our own internal teams and our health colleagues. The aims of the project are to ensure that the parent-child centred practice is really at the centre of everything, and that we are complying fully with the spirit of the Code of Practice and the principles of it, as well as the statutory requirements. So this is all being set up really with the backdrop of increasing demand for EHC needs assessments and our specialist placements, as we've already discussed previously, and Sue has covered in her schools organisation plan there. So we're seeing on average a 6 to 7% increase in the HCPs. And just as a snapshot for you for information, during September 21 alone, our SEN commissioning panel considered 60 requests for statutory assessment, 54 of which went through. 55 assessments reached the final stages, and all but 8 proceeded to issue an EHCP. So this is just to give you an idea of the volume that are coming through. A total of 92 plans were written and finalised in August and September. And now our Northumberland rate of EHCPs is at 3.9% of the school population, with the national rate at 3.7. So around the same level, but slightly higher. And additionally, and crucially related to Sue's work, is that in September we had 50 new requests for special school places. So that's just in 1 month alone. So members of School Forum who are school based or governors will start to hear more and more about the Better Futures project, and we will be keeping people up to date with actions as it progresses. But the idea is that we'll seek stakeholder voice through this period up until Christmas, then we'll start to implement some changes and build up an action plan moving forward. We've got a temporary member of staff helping us with this work, Jude Nash, who has a track record of service improvement regarding EHCP processes and pathways in other local authorities. So she's really getting her teeth into it now. She's been with us for about 3 weeks. So that concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions around that or the contents of the report. Kath, that's a question for you. From you, sorry.
Yeah,
have you invited?
I was just wondering if you'd invited any of the eyes to the stakeholder meetings, because invariably it's settings like ourselves who are starting that EHCP process, and trying to get children specialist places at reception is really, really difficult.
Yes,
yeah.
No. We haven't yet. We're in the series of setting up the stakeholder meetings, Kath, so we will be. It is on the agenda to invite PVIs. Yeah, very important that your voice is heard. Graham, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Right, I said I'm having an easy time this morning. No, so no further questions from anybody? No. Can I say, Sam, and Nicola, an excellent report, an excellent presentation, and thank you so much for all the excellent work you're doing, and obviously informing School Forum and keeping everybody up to date with everything. So yes, it's an excellent report. My concern is obviously amount of children that are going on to educational care plan, and the forecast, the numbers are going up. Can we manage it? Will the authority be able to manage that as it goes up throughout the years?
Well, Graham, I'll come in first. I'm sure other colleagues might want to join. This is part of the aim of the Better Futures project, because actually we need to ensure that what we're doing is high quality and sustainable. We can't keep adding more and more staff to the teams to meet more and more demand. We've got to do something different. So this is the reason why we've kind of taken this step, so that we can really bottom out and modernise what we do within the spirit and the guidelines of the code. Also in mind, we know that the SEND review, we've been promised a version of the SEND review in this spring, I believe. So there could be new guidance associated with the Children and Families Act that we are all duty bound to follow in the spring. So we need to keep a slightly open mind around how we move forward. But yeah, the direction of the Better Futures project is to make sure that we have got sustainable systems.
Okay, thanks. David, do you want to ask a question? David Street?
A comment really, just in terms of the increased demands and the priority from Education and Skills of trying to meet need as close to home as possible. I think we'll probably, Nicola, sound on me, I'm talking out of turn here, but possibly come into a forum at points in the future trying to talk about how we can increase the support for mainstream schools in meeting need, be it an EHCP learner or a SEND learner without a plan. Just obviously everyone wants to meet needs as close to home as possible, but is there anything that the forum can do through financial methodology or provision of services which will support those places in the mainstream? Watch this space for some requests and discussions around that area, I think.
And the ongoing request for transfer into the high needs block, as we've had previously, which is funding the specialist support services, really helps with that direction of travel. So that if we're able to provide support earlier and more extensively, as we've done during last year, albeit through COVID, then we're in a much better place for supporting schools. And what David says, with perhaps some additionality around funding, we're hoping that we will continue to be able to work and turn the tide a little bit, supporting schools and families to feel confident that they can meet needs close to home.
Yes, Andrea, Director, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just really probably a brief comment to summarise some of what the team have talked about there. You may not have noticed that Nicola's job title has slightly changed and has been extended. Nicola almost has the longest job title in the world at the moment, but she remains Head of Inclusive Education Services. But actually I've added on in mutual discussion with Nicola and SEN transformation. And I'm hoping that this committee will start to see through the work that the team are doing. You will notice already Sue has talked about in the school organisation plan about being able to meet needs closer to home. How do we understand our pupil numbers across the county? What are the particular needs? Nicola and Sam have both talked about our on average 7% year-on-year increase of education healthcare, children who require education healthcare plans. So continuing to do what we've always done isn't a possibility. And so the Better Futures project is really at the heart of transforming an awful lot of this work, plus the additional work around the work in primary, secondary, special schools, to just get some new models in place that are consistent and really long-term sustainable. So it kind of gives the committee a bit of context around why our priorities state the clear ambition around all and every child. That's really, really important to state. We do talk about that very, I'm going to say ordinarily, in terms of the Education and Skills team. But it is really important that we end up with the rest of the community also talking about all and every child and having that level of importance. And so, you know, over time, this committee is likely to get more reports. Some of it will be about, you know, maybe we'd like to look at the funding in this sense or this sense, but actually it's about investment and working out where we get our better return more broadly around the county to be able to invest in our children and our schools across the whole system.
Thank you, Audrey. Just one question, obviously, there, because it's come up in my school. Placement into special schools. And obviously it came up, they didn't want a place within Northumberland, they wanted one in North Tyneside or Newcastle, because it was easier for the parent going to work and dropping the child. What pressure is put on the authority to actually, when a parent asks for that request, or to make sure that it can be provided within the Northumberland area? Who wants to answer that one?
Sam, I can see you smiling. Sam can follow me, Graham. So essentially, parental choice is a very strong factor in the arrangements. Having said that, we would always encourage parents in our discussions with them to consider Northumberland placements initially, but we are also in the position where we are often under significant pressure in our Northumberland special schools. So basically there isn't a straightforward answer to it. Every case would be looked at individually based on individual needs. Sam, anything to add?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. It does come down to the individual needs of the child and young person. And I think the other thing to note is that the challenges we are experiencing around specialist capacity are not unique to Northumberland. They are being experienced by our regional counterparts as well, who are facing challenges of the same strength and tone, really. So yes, it always comes down to the needs of the individual children and young person and their particular circumstances.
Okay. Any further questions for Nicola or Sam, or any further comments? Okay then, right, so we'll move on then. Thank you very much for your presentation and your report, Sam and Nicola. Thank you so much for it. Right, we'll move on to item 9, comparison of North East School Block Funding Formula Value 21 to 22, pages 83 to 86 on your agenda papers. I believe this is you, Bruce.
Apologies, Chair. Yes, it is. If we just look briefly at the paper and the pack, first of all, then there's a very short presentation just to provide some sort of immediate context, really. Again, as I say in the paragraph 1 of the report, this is again about providing additional context in relation to the National Funding Formula update, the sparsity consultation, and associated proposals for 22-23. Again, it's just essentially about showing where Northumberland sits and what, while we say we still have a locally determined formula, we work within key criteria that is determined by the ESFA. So, there is a limited amount of flexibility or local determination in that anyway. Highlighting initially the ORPU values. Again, in terms of 6 of the 13 authorities, and the comparisons are done with the 12 Northeast authorities and also Cumbria as a neighbour, which shares a number of the same characteristics. In terms of primary ORPU, 6 essentially had a figure that was in line with the national funding formula. 1 authority had a figure that was under national funding formula and 6 were over. And you can see that, but actually, as you'll find around ORPU, that the difference between the respective values is generally quite small. I think we've seen a spread or a difference of 1.8% between 3113 at the bottom and 3168. We'll pick up again the key stage 3 and key stage 4 values when we look at the presentation, but similar observations in relation to that, really. Deprivation, again, we can, it's mandatory to have deprivation included in the formula. But you can choose from any combination of the 3 related formula factors around free school meals forever 6, i.e. any child that's qualified in the last 6 years, and also a DACI based on a child's postcode. You will remember that historically Northumberland did not use free school meals for ever 6, which was why we've historically had a higher free school meals value. We again had started to bring that down towards national funding formula, but maintained a level over and above the national funding formula last year because of the changes to pupil premium qualification dates and the adverse impact that had on the school during 21-22. Again, we'll see that in context. DACI is again harder to compare because of the different levels of banding, but generally speaking, all authorities are very tight around national funding formula in relation to DACI figures. Low prior attainment, again, it's important to reinforce that all 151 authorities nationally lose low prior attainment. And as you'll see, historically, Northumberland's value was significantly under national funding formula. Again, we agreed a 2-stage strategy last year to address that, and that's reflected in the proposals later on. Lump sum, again, largely in line. Mobility. Historically, mobility hasn't been included in the national funding formula within Northumberland. I'll confess I've had misgivings about the quality of the data used by the SFA in relation to that, and whether in fact it was measuring the right thing. What mobility does is compensate schools for those pupils who do not start and do not feature, who do not have a traditional September start date, i.e. the measure is if the first school census a pupil doesn't feature in is not the October census, it will then support, it will then potentially qualify for mobility for 3 years after that. It's important to note that there is a threshold of 6% of the overall pupil numbers anyway, so it's only pupils once you're over that 6% of pupils qualifying, so there is acceptance that there will be an element of mobility anyway. We historically haven't used it, but it is a factor within the national funding formula. I think the proposal in the paper suggests that in line with the approach we've previously taken around closing the gap is that we would potentially move a 50% weight towards national funding formula. That again sends a clear message that we're looking to move towards national funding formula still, while enabling us to see if there are any sort of unintended consequences or any issues around the data once we get that through in October 2021. The amounts of money determined by this factor based on October 2020 data is relatively small. I think as I outlined in the report, it was 56,000 in total across all of Northumberland schools. So again, if we went half the way there, it would essentially determine, you know, somewhere in the region of £28,000 amongst a, you know, £200 million schools block. I'll just pause briefly there in case there are any questions.
Any questions for Bruce? Everybody happy with what he's doing and spending our money?
Enabling schools to spend their money, Chair. But there you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fine. Last but not least, again, growth and falling rules fund. We had previously introduced a growth fund, so we were able to better match where we have, you know, in line with Sue's presentation earlier today, where we have additional places required, rather than trying to forecast that 12 months in plans. We'll work with schools and fund that money from the growth fund. Historically, we haven't used a falling rules fund. There are clear criteria from the DFE around that. The two key ones are essentially that it's only available to a school that's either good or outstanding, and that local planning data must show that surplus places will be required in the next 3 years. Again, just a little bit of a graphical illustration of this. I'll share this now. Again, primary ARPU, as I said, Northumberland resplendent in red and yellow. Again, the standard national funding formula figure is £3,123, which you see being, you know, evident in the number of authorities at that level. So we do pay sort of slightly more than that at this stage. Again, a reminder that the intention is to bring that in line with national funding formula next year, because it won't be sustainable to do so on an ongoing basis. Key Stage 3 ARPU, again in line with national funding formula, and Key Stage 4 has been over and above national funding formula. We closed the gap by half last year, and the proposal is that we do so again this year. Primary free school meals, again, as we outlined in the report, we have the highest value in the region. The proposal is that we take that back in line with national funding formula this year because of the adjustment in the data. A move from January to October data should have worked through the system by now. Again, free school secondary mirrors that. Funding, again, just in terms of distribution by deprivation, it may be inferred that because we have relatively high levels of per unit funding distributed via free school meals, actually overall the amount of funding distributed by reference to deprivation is still relatively small, certainly compared to some of our Northeast partners. That reflects the respective positions of the individual authorities, of course, notwithstanding the fact that some of that will be targeted in specific areas, obviously within Northumberland. There we go. Again, the other side of that, low prior attainment, where we are by some the authority that funds at the lowest value at the moment. Again, we made significant changes to that in 2021 for 21-22, and are proposing to do so again to close that gap during 22-23. Again, sparsity is, we've talked about already on the agenda. It's not a factor that affects all Northeast authorities, but you can see those that do, and those who use sparsity use it at the maximum value permitted by the ESFA. It would be hard in Northumberland's case to do anything else, given that we've been lobbying for additional funding to go into sparsity. But the proposal is we will continue to do so. Again, growth and falling rural funds. The amount of money we set aside is relatively small compared to some authorities, and that's important because it comes out of the school's DSG. And I don't think we would be proposing a significant change in the approach we've been taking around that. Again, we would look to investigate whether or not it is appropriate to set up a falling rules fund, but with, again, relatively small amounts of funding involved, I think. Again, just a combination here. The orange graph that you see is essentially the amount of funding distributed via ARPU, and then the black line is the amount of funding distributed overall by pupil-led funding, pupil-led factors. Northumberland, you will see in terms of the pupil-led factors, is relatively small at 87.2%. I think we're the second smallest authority in the Northeast. That's essentially dictated by the fact we have a large number of schools, so there is a significant amount of the funding determined, determined by lump sum factors. Again, we draw money in through the national funding formula to reflect that, but that's why we distribute a slightly smaller amount by reference to pupil-led data. Primary secondary ratio, again, we're essentially just at 1.25 is the amount of money that goes into primary compared to secondary. Obviously, primary, as we've seen, have higher ARPU figures, but again, we're not as high as some of the authorities, reflecting the relatively large number of sort of smaller primary schools that we have within Northumberland. Okay. And again, just on that final slide, and again, we'll pick this up in the subsequent paper, just reinforcing some of the key thoughts, see some of the key considerations which arose through Funding Formula Committee when we looked at these previously. Looking for reaffirmation really of the previous commitment to move to national funding formula in 22-23. And again, in terms of in the event there was any additional funding in the formula, how do we redistribute that? It's not likely to be a significant amount of funding within the formula, but you will remember last year that essentially we distributed through free school meals because of the change to the pupil premium qualifying dates. Do we wish to investigate the introduction of a falling rule fund in line with the DFE criteria? Again, MFG is an important one for consideration. The minimum funding guarantee, which essentially sets the level of minimum per pupil increase. And again, as I've said so many times in the past, it is per pupil funding that will drive overall school budgets. Do we look to set that minimum funding guarantee at 2%, thereby guaranteeing that the highest possible level within the formula and within the constraints set by the ESFA for per pupil funding across Northumberland? And again, should we look to introduce a mobility element, as I've again previously suggested we may want to within school funding? And if so, how do we look to do that? Do we go full bang, or do we look to reduce it on a tapered basis in order to assess the impact of the data? Okay, I'll leave that up for the moment, but I'm quite happy to take any questions or any thoughts arising from the presentation.
Any questions for Bruce on his presentation, please? Hi, everybody seemed to be very happy this morning, yeah?
Hopefully, I mean, it was comprehensive. Again, happy to help. But again, what we're really doing is trying to tie all this up in the subsequent agenda paper. Okay.
Right, if you're all
Thank
happy,
you.
We'll move on to item 10 of the agenda. National Funding Formula for 2022-23, and that pages 87 to 102, the consultation paper. So I believe that's you again, Bruce.
It is, Chair.
Yeah, there is some recommendations there on the paper, White. And as chair of the high needs block, I'm sorry to have to come back to you again. And I didn't really want to come back to you again and ask for 0.5% of the final value of school block to be transferred into the high need block. But as you can see, the numbers of SEN and educational care plans are going up. And obviously we are getting the balance down, but we need to be prepared to do it. So I'm asking you to again, or pleading with you as chair of the high needs block, can we please have some bit more money? It'd be very nice if we got the extra money that was kind of more could be promised, you know, up to 43. It'd be nice to get £44 million into the high needs block instead of 43, and then we wouldn't need to come back to you each year. So Bruce, can I hand you to go through this paper and do the recommendations, please?
Yep, happy to, Chair. And again, just picking up on that sort of figure in relation to education, health and care plans. I know Sam and Nicola's report had highlighted the fact that, you know, medium term, we've had an increase of somewhere around 7% in terms of plans year on year. It's probably important to highlight that, in fact, you know, the numbers are accelerating. The increase to the latest year, and the latest year in terms of 2021 is 10%. So, you know, there is increasing pressure, and that was evident in sort of Nicola's anecdotal evidence about the, you know, the number of assessments coming through in September. Okay, we will come back to the recommendations in terms of as set out in paragraph 2 of the report. We work through the rest of the report for the moment. Again, a little bit of context and a reminder, hopefully, to Schools Forum members. We at the equivalent meeting last year, we agreed for 2021-22 a two-step approach to the adoption of the national funding formula figures. Highlighted there in the table at the top of page 88 or page 2 of this specific report were the key items where we were still out of line with national funding formula, both for primary and key stage 4 OPU where we were above, and for low prior attainment at primary where we were below, as demonstrated by the graphs previously. The majority of that table was in last year's report, but what I've essentially done is add a final column which demonstrates the potential, the final national funding formula rates for 2022-23 and the potential Northumberland County Council rates for 22-23. should we, press on and continue to adopt those. Again, the idea was around this transitional approach would be what it enabled us to do was give a degree of protection to schools who benefited from the higher OPU rates than the national funding formula. But essentially, we've tried to sound that this was coming and given it clear, unambiguous messages around this, and that's what we're charged with sort of finalising today, if you like. Overall figures, again, sort of £208 million provisionally in terms of the DSG. Again, both in terms of these figures, the key proviso at this point, this is again based on October 2020 data. When we get the final figures through in mid to late December 2021, it will then reflect the October 21 school census data. Obviously, schools will be aware of their data by now and will start to have a feeling for what the likely impact of that is on there. And again, as I say, I've said before, and I make no apologies for saying again, obviously, school pupil numbers will be the key driver around that. Okay, again, just for information for Schools Forum, we've previously highlighted the impact of minimum per pupil funding and the increases distributed by minimum per pupil funding. I think it's important to highlight that the 22-23 increase is only 2%, whereas historically that has been bigger as the figures have come up to the baseline £4,000 and £5,000 values. That is important for those schools who are in receipt of minimum per pupil funding, because that will give them an indication of what their likely level of overall per pupil increase is. Again, we've mentioned sparsity. We've already dealt with sparsity elsewhere in the separate paper on the agenda, but again, it's reinforcing that good news for Northumberland story essentially. Paragraph 7, transfer from the schools block. Again, it's the authority's intention to request a transfer from the schools block. A reminder that historically, while we requested 1% back in 2018 and 2019-20, given that we have been successful in reducing the high needs deficit, which was standing at over around £3 million back in those days, we reduced that for the last 2 years to 0.5%. And again, that would be the maximum figure requested for 22-23, depending on the final funding figures. Again, having demonstrated the additional pressure on SEN services, the 10% increase in plan numbers overall, the important context is that transfer supports the continued provision of the HINT, sorry to use the correct title, I said the Inclusive Education Services offer, that was previously funded via service level agreement charges. The overall cost of that essentially is 2.055 million in 21-22. Obviously, the maximum funding based on the transfer on the provisional settlement figure would be 1.043 million, with the balance being funded from the high needs block. But again, further information will be provided to the January and February meetings in respect of this. I've previously highlighted, pressures on the central services block, central services to schools block, CSSB. Forum will be aware that we have flagged historically the unwinding of the historic responsibilities. That was something we successfully challenged with the ESFA, on last year, and had and received an increase in that block based on our ongoing commitments around historic pension commitments and capital costs. Nevertheless, that continues to unwind on the basis of 20% a year. More surprisingly, and even less welcome this year, was a fall in the ongoing responsibilities element and the per pupil element arising from that. Again, while that was raised with the ESFA, there was no obvious response or coherent response I could share in relation to that in terms of result of formula and pupil changes, but that's something again, we need to be mindful of, because that falls as a pressure upon the council. And again, it's something I should have pointed out moving on in terms of paragraph 9. I know to David's frustration, there is no data yet in relation, or indicative figures in relation to the early years block. The first time we get sight of those is in December. And again, we've fulfilled all of the respective reporting deadlines around sort of the summer census and autumn term summer term census in relation to some of the specific requirements this year, as sort of numbers have started to recover post-COVID. Dedelegation. Again, schools will recall that essentially dedelegation is something that's applicable just to maintain schools for funding certain elements of services which were permitted to seek schools form agreement on. Formal delegation proposals will again come to the January meeting. Members will recall, of course, that having secured dedelegation decisions previously, we refunded the contingency figure last year because we hadn't had a specific call on it, and we do continue to monitor that. There are 4 services for which we've sort of dedelegated funding for 21-22. Again, that's school reorganisation, restructuring contingency, free school meal eligibility checking, trade union facility time, and support to BME groups. Again, using the specific relevant factors within the formula. It's anticipated at this point that dedelegation will be again sought in respect of these services at values in line with last year. A new development, and something that's developed relatively recently over the last month or so, is the fact that the DFE has published details of a consultation on how school improvement functions will be funded in the future. And again, there's a link to that, the full details in the paper. There is some confusion around that in some of the coverage I've seen in the press, but I think it's important to highlight that while some of the press coverage has talked about top slicing, that, as anticipated, won't be possible for any school improvement funding in relation to this. It will be again through dedelegated funds. We're continuing to monitor developments in relation to that. The consultation remains open until the 26th of November, but the proposal on the table currently is that a school improvement grant would be cut by 50% for 22-23 and phased out entirely 23-24. And to provide some context, I think that's around £170,000 for colleagues to, yeah, I can see Abby's sort of confirming that. That's helpful. Thanks, Abby. So again, we will again provide further information to the January Schools Forum in relation to that as part of any formal dedelegation decision that's requested in relation to that. Okay, and again, paragraph 11, just trying to bring together some of the previous items considered elsewhere on the agenda and previously considered by Funding Formula Committee. Certainly the position at Funding Formula Committee was that they were keen to establish MFG at 2%, giving the largest possible per pupil increase to all schools, continuing to use capping and scaling if required to ensure affordability as we move towards national funding formula, introducing the mobility element, and then further introducing the falling roles fund if it felt appropriate and there was demand there at a relatively low amount. Again, these are the key principles that we're required to, that we'll be reflecting when we set our values, given the final formula figures in 22-23 in December. But I'm going to stop for any comments there before we look at the next steps and then the recommendations.
Any comments for Bruce? For the early years, David, or think about, we got any early years? They concerned about obviously the lateness of getting that, obviously the figures in. Have you got any concerns about that, David?
It continues to be a worry, Graham. I mean, we have, through the sort of prudent use of the early years block, been able to passport as much of it on as humanly possible to settings in the past, and we'll continue to try and do that. They're just the late confirmation of previous year's funding, so there is some clawback stroke additions to go into, and we don't know what that is yet, plus the late publication of the expectation for future years does make it difficult for us to do so. For example, we probably would look to, as we've done to in the past, increase the hourly rates for early years providers, but it's actually basically impossible for us to do that with any certainty because we don't know for certain how much money is going to come into the pot. So strategies in the past, as I say, of trying to passport as much as possible, but if we don't know how much is possible, we don't know how much we can passport. And so it's just difficult decision making. And apologies, but it might mean that we need to try and make some quick decisions in the new year. So apologies in advance if you get a paper for consideration and some quick decision making at that point in time by the forum.
Have we got anybody on the forum from early years other than obviously David? Is anybody there from?
Kath, who spoke earlier, on the SEN, is obviously the early years rep. Graham.
Kath, give you a chance to come in, please. I see your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, so it's difficult for early years settings due to numbers and minimum wage and everything going up. But there is an excellent project happening at the minute called Closing the Gap. And there's a number of settings and schools who are being used as Closing the Gap champions. And we're looking at how to use the available funding, which is the EYPP funds and the E-Star and the DAP, creatively to support pupils to close that gap. There's some excellent information being given via the Schools 360 and Schools Readiness Passport, so settings can see exactly where their gaps are, where their funding's coming from, who's on track, who's not on track. The only downside of it at the moment is it's dependent upon available funding, and there's a cap as to how much each setting can get, and those settings with a high number of children who need E-Star or EHCPs are obviously at a disadvantage because of the cap on the finance, but it's a very worthwhile project which is there to help early years at the moment.
Kath, do you think you can do a short paper forum about that, so we can obviously have it there for obviously when we come to discussion, you know, in January and February? Would that be too much trouble for you?
Yeah, no, that'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that would be handy to have, because obviously you're the one on the ground actually operating, and we're obviously further up the thing. So it'd be very useful to know how you manage when you get such late information and everything like that. Yes, David, you were coming in, yeah.
Just if it would be useful, Kath, it obviously is great to see how the plans from the early years team are progressing and how they're impacting for yourself. Maybe if we could have a double act between someone from the early years team, which could maybe set up what the plans were, and then Kath, you can come in with how it's actually impacting on the ground. Would that be useful?
Yeah, that would be great.
I think, yes, I think we need to look at early years and everything like that, because it seemed to be the Cinderella service, isn't it? We have to wait to the very end of December or beginning of January before you get your numbers in and everything like that. So it must be very hard planning 1 year ahead, restaffing and anything like that if you don't know what you're going to get. So yeah, I think that'd be worthwhile. Abigail, would you like to say anything? Because you keep nodding your head every so often. I think you're agreeing to everything that we're saying.
No, I don't have anything else to add to that. No, that's fine.
Okay, then. Any further questions from anybody before we go back to the recommendations, or for Bruce? Right, we're baffling you all with science today. Right, recommendation. I'll just go and get the thing back down to the beginning of that.
Thanks, Graham. I mean, again, before we look at specifically at the recommendations, Appendix A covers again, provides the sort of proposed values or potential values, as the columns labelled, for Northumberland for 22-23. Again, That's again subject to affordability and final funding coming through in December, but we certainly wouldn't anticipate figures being significantly different from that. Yeah. They incorporate the mobility figures as outlined at a 50% value, 463 and 665 respectively. But in relation to each and every other value within the formula, we would be at a national funding formula value now, including low prior attainment.
Yeah.
I've just realised again. I apologise, and it's an appendix. I'm always sort of slightly cynical about, but we generally produce at this point illustrative data based on the October 2020 settlement figures. October 2020 pupil data, and try to provide an illustration of what that means in terms of for sort of 2022-23 funding. Again, that's subject to review following the release of the final data. I will share some indicative figures with you on screen now and circulate those following the meeting. Again, I have to emphasise that they're based on the October 20 data. They will be revised for October 2021, and the fact that the new sparsity mechanism hadn't been reflected in the formula yet. So again, nevertheless, we'll pick those up. Again, sorted in terms of potential highest levels of increase, and not surprisingly, we see a large number of smaller primary schools towards the top end, for reasons we've outlined already on the agenda. And scrolling down, number of schools benefiting from sort of 2% year-on-year increases, as influenced by sort of general levels to some of the values, and more specifically minimum per pupil funding. Schools which are under that 2% threshold will be generally schools who aren't benefiting from the increase in the low prior attainment increases, but essentially are then coming to line around the ORPU figures. Again, I will produce that. I will format that and circulate it following the meeting. And apologies that hasn't gone out subsequently, hasn't gone out previously.
Thank you, Bruce. Right, okay. We'll come
back to the report.
Yes, obviously. Then we'll deal now, obviously, with the recommendation, paragraph 2. So, A, your forum agree that we recommend.
Apologies, Graham. Can I just pick up one other item first?
Yeah. Just
reminding Schools Forum that following this meeting, we will go to consultations with schools. We have a draft consultation outlined at Appendix C, highlighting some of the key issues we've talked about in relation to the introduction of mobility into the funding formula, the use of capping and scaling, minimum funding guarantee, the transfer from the schools block, and the introduction of a falling rules fund. If there are any sort of questions or observations in relation to consultation, I'd be, and the draft consultation paper features in pages 95 to 97 of the agenda pack.
Okay, right. Thanks for that, man. Bruce, obviously the recommendation A, agree to transfer up to 0.5% of the final values for block ongoing to the cost of SEND support services once the final DFG value is released in that. Does Forum recommend that to go ahead? Or anybody got any objections to it? All agree? Right. Okay. B, agree that the funding value to 2023 be set in line with the principle outlined in the report, and agree that these are the basis for a wider consultation with the school. Does Forum recommend that these go ahead? Everybody agree? Good. C, note the delegation of the final decision of value to the executive director. I'm not going to read it all out, but obviously it's giving Audrey the power to actually carry out the decision that the Forum recommends and everything like that. Do you agree? I'm sorry, I'm giving you a bit more work to do, Audrey. And the final one, receive the following report of school forum meeting on the 19th of January, outcome of the consultation with the school and the final funding value for use in 2022-23. The forum agreed with that recommendation to go forward. Great. Right, so that's it. Thanks. So no other further questions any on that? Then we'll just move on to the next item, which is obviously the work programme for the coming year and everything like that. Do we? Right. Yeah. Do we have anything else there? Are we having a high needs block on the 1st of December or not? Or do we need a high needs block meeting?
I suggest, unfortunately, Sam's left the meeting, Graham.
Yeah.
We'll touch base with Sam and Nicola and come back certainly by the end of this week in relation to that. See,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. And apologies, there was a blank page in my pack, but obviously the illustrative sort of 22-23 figures are at the end of the pack there, around page 99 to 101.
Right. Okay. Then. Right. So we see the work programme, and obviously then the next meeting of the school forum is. Let me just give you the right date for that. And then obviously Wednesday the 19th of January, is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct, yeah.
Right. Is there any other business? I haven't been notified of any other business. Bruce, have you been notified of any business or?
I'm not aware of any other business, Chair.
Yeah, okay, right. So we got the date of the next meeting, obviously the 19th. Can I thank you all for making my life very easy as chairing the first school forum for some time. And Andrea, I must admit your background is superb, and I love the saying above your head there. I think it should be put into every school. I think it's an absolutely beautiful saying there, and it's actually what should be said, right? It is absolutely superb, yeah. Being obviously worked in a national park and obviously walked along there and flown across in a helicopter at the cost of Northumberland, it's nice to see that background. It brings back happy memories as well. So thank you very much. And I would say safe journey home, but as far as I go into the kitchen to make myself another larty. Right, so thank you very much, and I hope to see you. But obviously have a joyful Christmas if I don't see you before school and high knees blocking about that. Thank you for your time today. So, right.